Brilliant, thanks.
Good evening and welcome to Surbiton Pop Talks and this our autumn episode, Say It With Pride. I'm Stuart Bird, teacher of English, some of you may know me, and also Community Outreach Coordinator, which brings us here a part of our community programme, these Pop Talk events for you. And if you're interested, my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Serafina. I'm a Year 12 student of Computer Science, Drama and English Language, and my pronouns are she, they. Tonight on Pop Talks, we have some incredible speakers here to cherish, to celebrate, to illuminate, to support, and to question what it means to freely be who we are. Amor nos semper ducat is our motto, aka may love always lead us. Surbiton High, a school founded for the education of young women in 1884, almost 135 years ago, opening its doors to 11 girls. This year, 2 women founded its first Pride Society, a place to feel belonging, support, encouragement, to share, to connect, to laugh, a place to be. They hoped 11 students might attend, and they were flooded with 50. Some feverish, some furtive, but it's theirs. It's growing every single week. It's a place for everyone under the rainbow, under this ever-growing acronym. It's a kind of home within our compassionate community where people can be who they are and say it with pride. It's the empowering stuff the school was built on. I mean, they didn't know how much they needed it until it happened, right?
It's too true, right? So may love always lead us. That's why we're here. So we're here to discuss, amongst other things, sport, film, poetry, literature, and in particular, the life and work of the world's most famous playwright. We're absolutely delighted to welcome today Dominic Leonard, a South London-based award-winning poet. We have Chris Hugill with us, in spirit at least, if not in body, a sports broadcaster, and you may know him as the voice of Newsbeat, and Professor Emma Smith, one of the world's leading voices on Shakespeare, here to enlighten us on queer readings of his work and possibly, who knows, his life. And they will help us consider what literature and film and form might tell us about the world in which we live and this society that we want, possibly, as we look to support the LGBTQ+ community and say it with pride. Guys, don't forget, we'd love to get your questions. In the top right corner there, you should have a Q&A chat icon. So please do send through your questions. You may have some questions you're bursting with right now and you can't wait. Please send them through. Otherwise, particularly if you're inspired, as our speakers are talking this evening, do send some questions through and we'll have a chat at the end. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely, no question is too big or too small. Feel free to send them whenever you want. So let's have a think. It's 2022 and queer news is everywhere, isn't it? Queer literature has almost become mainstream literature. Queer TV is perhaps mainstream TV. It might be easy to think that queer is no longer taboo. Queer is loud and proud and should be shouted from every fabulous rooftop. For example, in the terms of, TV, there's, I'm sure many of the students of the school will have seen it. It's Heartstopper on Netflix. It's adorable, cutesy and bubbly and wonderful, though there is, that's nothing. That's what I heard you say something. Even though one of the leads was forced out himself as bisexual, Kim Connor, who played Nick. Moving away from that, there is also programs like Sex Education and RuPaul's Drag Race, to name a few. Though some people are trying to become more inclusive these days. Like, I think I saw an episode of Peppa Pig had 2 mums in a family once, which is rather incredible considering how long that program's been running. And in terms of books, at least fiction, our younger readers of the school may know about Love Frankie by Jacqueline Wilson. I was absolutely, it was very heartwarming to see that from one of my favorite authors from so long ago. But moving away from books and things like that, there's also music. Recently, Kim Petras became the first transgender pop star to rise up the UK charts. And also, in his new series of documentaries, Louis Theroux interviews rising star Youngblood, a cross-dressing pansexual pop idol who champions liberated love and life for all, and then has a Black Hearts Club, which is an LGBTQ+ fan group who connect with him at live gigs in an almost religious fervour.
Yeah, and that's a great series if you haven't seen that interview with Yola. Elsewhere in the sporting arena, of course, this season, perhaps inspired by the popularity and bravery of other leading gay athletes such as Tom Daley, Jack Daniels has come out as the English Football League's first openly out gay footballer while playing. And queer news regularly now hits the headlines, doesn't it? So that's good, right? But well, it's 2022. It's 400 years since Shakespeare. It's 2,000 years since Christ. It's 200,000 since man first appeared on this earth. Are we still talking about this?
Yeah, it's incredible that we still seem to be going in circles. Like, I mean, it's true. You're so incredibly true. Some of those arguments that people make seem like a broken record. It's shocking that we have to just keep going backwards. But getting back on track, we have to think that surely the fact that any of this is making news at all means it's still a big deal, almost a bad deal. But we're talking about the past, so let's move a little bit back into the now. It's the World Cup going on, there's plenty to talk about there, which Chris Hugo will comment on later. But there's something we've got to think about here. Is it right that such a massively popular, well-supported tournament is given to a country where the LGBTQ+ community is punished? Or is that getting political when sport should transcend politics? I'm sure many of you have heard about the controversy about the One Love wristbands, as well as rainbow bucket hats being forced to remove upon entering the stadium, as well as recent stories involving, what was it, Germany?
Germany yesterday had
hand over their mouth in the team photo, and yes, things like that.
And Denmark might be leaving the tournament now, which would be a massive statement. We'll see if that happens and what happens there at the World Cup. But let's try and put this homophobic, transphobic issue and legality into some global perspective, shall we, without getting too much into politics. But we said it's 2022. 69 countries across the world still criminalise homosexual acts and relationships. Nearly half of these are in Africa. Interestingly, or perhaps ironically, many of these instated such laws because of the work of British Christian missionaries who went out to the colonies in the 19th and 20th centuries. What's our responsibility there? In recent years, several African nations, though, have drawn back and decriminalised homosexual relationships, including Angola, Gabon, Botswana, Seychelles, to name a few. Whereas others, though, in response to growing sexual freedom around the world, have tightened their laws, such as Nigeria and Uganda, sadly.
That's a bit unfortunate. I still can't believe it. Like, how is it that who we are and who we love became so politicized, so criminalized? As the slogan says, love is love. Surely love should be cherished, not punished. Another to have recently decriminalized homosexual relationships is the Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Native to the region, the wonderful poet Shivani Ramlachan was to be here this evening to talk of her experiences of growing up as a gay girl in the Caribbean even. But sadly, she cannot be here. She has returned from the Singapore Literature Festival with the flu. She sends her heartfelt apologies and is keen to join us another time. But so that we may at least have something of her brave, defiant, powerful voice, here is one of her poems for all of us to savour. It's called I See That Lilith Hath Been With Thee Again. Love, I saw our daughter in the grocery store again. This time she'd discarded the old shoes, because finally her hooves are coming through. She was using her talons to tear through meat packets. Oh, honey, I frowned. Your mum is a vegan. Our daughter followed me to the produce aisle, and she chewed one carrot, sadly, to try to make me happy. It didn't take. She could barely tame the wild things of her teeth. We sat and talked in the trunk of my car for about 15 minutes afterwards. I offered to pay for her shopping. She said, Mother, don't bother. I'm covered. I've got it sorted between the furnace and the fire, and the pit of my stomach is all my flame charring anyway. I'm set for days. She said, tell Mum don't worry. I've got a nice place. No boys. I'm finishing up my degree and I don't dream of having fathers. Not anymore. You raised me well. You can't even tell where the roots of my hair used to be. She said, I'm sorry I didn't want the same life as you both did. I guess that's what most mothers want to hear. Honey, oh honey, we did good. Lilith sends us love and photographs of her last kill. We made a mantelpiece of her baby antlers. We know how to breathe now, how not to be ungrateful. We love her, we just don't want the same thing she did. That's all.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Serafina. Terrific and lovely to hear her voice. We look forward to welcoming Shivani another time. But from one poet to another poet that I know Shivani knows, and certainly knows his work. Dominic Leonard's punchy pamphlets, Love, Bring Myself and Dirt, have been published by Broken Sleep Books, a press where community action, inclusivity, innovation are very much at the forefront of what's happening there. Do check it out. There's so much good material there, guys, at Broken Sleep. Dom won the Eric Gregory Award in 2019 and the Oxford Poetry Prize in 2022. He's also something of a self-confessed movie junkie, fascinated by how the edges of form are what define a form and its limits. And he's here to imaginatively explore this through the mediums of film and poetry. Good evening, Dom, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, sorry, trying to get off mute. Hi, it's really great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I hope you can all see me all right and can see my PowerPoint when it eventually comes up. I'm really grateful to be at this event, especially alongside a writer as wonderful and influential on me as Emma Smith. Ever since I was an undergraduate listening to all of her lectures online, I've been a big fan, and it's really great to be reading here with you. I'm very sad that Shivani's not here, who is a really incredible poet. If you haven't got her book, everyone knows I'm a Haunting. I really highly recommend it. It's one of the best books of poetry I've read in the last 10 years. It's extraordinary. It's particularly nice to be reading as part of Say It With Pride, which is a great outreach programme to herald both the current work being done by queer writers as well as saluting that long line of queer thinking that's preceded me and allowed me the space to do what I and others do. I'm going to start by reading a poem, and then I'm going to talk for a little while about what I consider to be the defining function of poetry, which is the line break, before reading another poem to end. I'll read the poem first, and then I'll put my slides up for the talk. So the first poem I'm going to read is called The Deer. God's truth. No one ever got as close as the apple that nearly choked me dead as a boy. I've worked for the bad guys all my life, but I'd never wish death on anyone for anything, I told my students. They were young, impressionable, staring, wishing a future where you can just turn a tree on and off. Outside, a deer long dead, preserved perfect, came floating down the high street on an ice floe. We made belts of its skin and sculptures of its bones, and only when it had put its signs upon us could I listen to what history had to tell me, though I was preoccupied with DIY. And besides, thinking deeply about the past is like waging war upon the field you are fighting for, and by the time the smoke has lifted, you've destroyed it. I looked away, said, "Oh, England," and carried on, hid in the stables. What if we're already dead? My hate will outlive me, and when I die, bury me in the fair soil. My pocket money share among my friends, the friends I have left, those I could trust with my terrible, sordid secret. I was friends with the first Prime Minister to die in office. The virus killed him. So, I will share my slides if Teams is going to be my friend, which I really hope it is. I don't know if they're appearing. I don't think they are. No. Oh wait, here we are. Apologies for my lack of ability with these things. Could I just get a thumbs up from somebody if it to show they're working? Great, fantastic, thank you. Okay. So, a month ago, I was in Herculaneum, one of the Roman towns destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. I spent a lot of my time there trying to escape the tour guides and their attendant masses, but the streets are spacious and so are the empty houses. The whole town is in a deep valley. You have to walk down what feels like a steep mine shaft to get down to it from the street level. In Herculaneum, you can walk around pointing at things and shock yourself by simply stating what they are. This is a street. This is a doorway. These are steps. The metaphorical possibilities of a place that was saved for posterity by virtue of its destruction, the material that killed its inhabitants simultaneously preserved the site for nearly 2,000 years. The reason we know it is there is because it is not there. A stone vestige are almost too overwhelming to consider. As Jacquetta Hawkes says, volcanoes remind us that we are part of a process. Their paintings, the Herculaneans, are simple, painted directly onto the walls. A lizard, men and women, gods, fruit, a boat. The surviving frescoes have had something strange done to them by the museum and keepers of the site. Frames have been added to them. This is for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the protection of the fresco, keeping them behind glass. But there's another dimension to this. They have been turned from frescoes, which inhabit the entire wall, even if they are just 1 foot wide, into paintings, hung as if they have been commissioned for a gallery or a country home. It's an obvious illusion, but it's one that blurs the boundary of what a painting is and where the painting stops on the wall. The artificial border, added thousands of years later, changes the form of the art and changes the way that it is looked at. One thing I heard in Herculaneum was from a 5-year-old girl, catching sight of Vesuvius through a destroyed wall, pointing up at the mountain in the clear blue sky, and she said, "That's what painting is." This phrase has stuck with me. What does it take to point at something and say, this is X, especially when its boundaries are so elusive? I want to talk a bit about line breaks as a unique poetic function alongside cuts in movies as a uniquely filmic function. Already I'm conflating and combining 3 different art forms, only one of which I have any real idea about, so please forgive any missteps that I make. I'm not trying to posit a general theory of reading. I hope I would be physically restrained if I did, but simply to try to describe something that I have personally experienced. So, to steal a question from John Berryman, what categories shall we use tonight? I hope that you can see on the screen 2 poems there, one by Rosemary Tonks and one by Pterica Lule. When I read a poem, the thing that reminds me most keenly that I am reading a poem is the line break. When a line ends or breaks off and the rhythm of my reading goes in 2 separate directions, one in the direction of the uninhabited white space to the right or left where the line ends, and the other darting backwards and down to the start of the next line, or indeed to wherever the next word is to be found. This curious dialectical movement is an emotional one and a psychological one as well as a physical one. My eyes aren't going in 2 separate directions, but the shape of the poem and the music of the poem has sent my brain in 2 directions. There is a subtle phenomenological event happening that tells me, pointing, this is what poetry is. You were going this way, but now you are going that way, to the next bar, but also plummeting like Thelma and Louise off an edge. I've begun to recognise that I feel the same way when I watch films, something I've been doing with more intensity over the last 4 years. Let's think about it simply first. 2 people are having a conversation on screen. The shot shows the person who is talking, and when the next person has a line, there is a cut, and so the shot goes to them. Please forgive my lack of technical accuracy regarding filmic terms. When the cut is used more imaginatively, the shot might linger on the person who is not talking, so we have access to their reaction to what the other person is saying. Each cut gives definition to the scene, gives it a pace and a focus. We are told by the director and the cinematographer and everyone else whose efforts have gone into making the shot what to look at and for how long. It is a durational art, and from duration comes the rhythms of our engagement. It is worth remembering that this is not an ordinary way of looking at or interacting with things in our day-to-day life. Life, real life, is a series of long takes recorded by your own naturally occurring lenses and projected back into your brain between your sleeping hours, and let's not get started on dreams. The compression of time and the compression of our attention in films guides us to new ways of seeing. The artificial limit of the take, be it a short or a long one, is the definition of the form. Not definition in the dictionary sense, but definition in the sense of giving something shape and relief, like a sculpture. We sense an outline that guides our thinking. Like poetic lines, a take in a film can be as short or as long as it needs to be. Art is made under volcanic emotional pressure, and it's this pressure which helps them make emotional sense to us when it's conveyed accurately, not necessarily clearly, but accurately. The emotion lies in the organisation of parts. Under the seam runs the pain, says Anne Carson. This emotional patchwork is emotional work, and it's those gaps stitched together, physically stuck together in the case of early film, which help us get closer to the thing itself. I realise I am being quite nebulous and unspecific, and should probably try to provide specific examples of what I'm talking about. To do that, I'd like to spend a moment on two things which might seem like a rebuttal to what I'm trying to put a name to, but I think in fact bolster it. That is the prose poem and the single shot film, the poem without line breaks and the film without cuts. By my logic, I would be saying that prose poems are not poems and one-take films are not films. Quite the contrary. In both of Claudia Rankine's American lyrics, Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Citizen, she, as she puts it, pulls the lyric back into its realities with the prose poem form, a form which Rankine has said is the most appropriate form to summon what she calls the music of the narrative of the devastation. The poems are interrogations of intimacy, relation, structural racism, microaggressions, and exhaustion. When I read Citizen, I am waiting for the line break that never comes. The white space surrounding the poems, above and below them, as well as the use of paratextual materials such as photographs and artwork, frame the poems in a new way. There is no unit of time or measurement or musical phrase in the conventional sense. It is all line or no line. There is a different form of music entirely, one that is stripped back, stark and factual. The page itself is a kind of notational system. If the line break is the moment at which I am knocked back into the reality of the poem, it is the very lack of conventional poemhood that makes Citizen's poetry so disarming. Such an effect would not be possible or apparent if my mode of reading were different. That's to say, if the ghost of the line break, or the ghost of lyric poetry, were not absolutely present. I am never more conscious of the poetic artifact, its shape and sonority, and how I am meant to inhabit it for a time as a reader than when I'm thinking about the line, either because I'm stumbling over the line breaks regularly, or because I'm stumbling forwards in the dark, waiting for a drop that doesn't come. So it is with very long takes in films, or one-take films. Two famous films come to mind as counter examples: Rope by Alfred Hitchcock, which there's a picture of on my slide, which I hope you can see, and 1917, directed by Sam Mendes. 1917 was praised on its release for its realism, happening in real time, more or less, as the soldier travels to the front lines to deliver a message. To me, the film could not have been less realistic, or rather, I could not have been more conscious of its artifice than when I was looking out for the moments where the cuts were secretly happening to give the illusion of one continuous take. The same goes for Rope, an early and quite bad example, a murder mystery happening in real time at an affluent dinner party. The single take formula did the exact opposite of its intention in these films, which were meant to feel shocking, fast-paced and realistic, like we were really there and experiencing the events as the characters did. Films that do the opposite of this are considerably more successful in achieving their desired effects for the simple fact that the long single take, like the long near unending line of the prose poem, does not feel realistic. It feels like a dream. The Chinese director Bai Gan's two most recent feature films, Kylie Blues and Long Day's Journey into Night, feature one exceptionally long take each. 41 minutes in Kylie Blues and 59 minutes in Long Day's Journey into Night. Both sequences are dreamlike, visionary and baffling, as well as monumental feats of engineering and ingenuity on behalf of the filmmakers. To link to my earlier point on Citizen, it is the lack of cuts which makes it feel like such a strange experience. The reason you begin to feel that you're experiencing something close to a dream is not because of the images on the screen, but because of the pace of those images and the fact that the form's most potent characteristic, the cut, is notably, artfully absent, an absence that is so distinct that it is a presence. This is particularly noticeable in Long Day's Journey into Night, in which the cinema goer is encouraged, before this take begins, the last hour of the film, to put on 3D glasses. I'm thinking of three other prominent filmmakers, unwilling participants in the awfully named slow cinema movement. The Thai director Apichatpong Weerasethakul, the Belgian director Chantal Akerman, and the Malaysian-Taiwanese director Simon Liang, whose exceptionally long, still takes of jungles, empty or sparsely populated rooms, menial tasks, staircases, corridors, overpasses, and cinemas continually draw the audience back to the vulnerability of their viewing. We are constantly aware of the barrier that makes film film. This take will not end. We will not be permitted access to the next thought, perspective, or event, and you feel, occasionally relentlessly, you are watching a film. Now that's film, some might say, in extravagant praise. I don't mean it in that sense, but you look at the long take and you reasonably think, that is film. I am viewing, and I know this because I am waiting. What I am trying to say is that, like cartoon characters with their thickly drawn black outlines, or like hedgerow-bound fields, or like the way a tree moves in wind, and it is that rooted movement, evidence of wind, that makes the wind wind. The limit is the definition. This is not a thinly veiled desire for formalism in poetry. It is as close as I can get to a definition of form itself. The desire to name, to denote and define might seem like a desire to contain, to own and to control. The word define comes from the Latin for putting a limit on something, giving it a boundary. What I'm trying to say is that acknowledging a boundary in an art form is not forcing a limitation, but giving it a shape, which is to say giving it music, which is something to do with hope. My desire for definition comes from, I think, a desire for permanent access to the mystery. It's a lifetime past trying to figure it out, though I may never get as close as Dom DeLillo did when he gave this definition of real life. It's the thing that's not the movies. I'm going to finish with one more poem, which I couldn't resist wheeling out in the presence of Emma Smith. I hope you'll forgive me. It's called Dream of 14 Shakespeares in the Fountain. They don't look like the portraits, but I know that it's him. I can see them all in the dark green dark, up to the roughs in inky water. There is no time to ask why there is such an ornate source this deep in the woods, just his lovely face and the blue Halloween smoke, their eyes televisions reflecting moonlight as the black wind rains down. They bob around, bumping into each other like seals in the night. It is not like the opening of Friends. They are not here to have a good time. I circle the fountain, trying to absorb the necessary information for when I wake up. The positions of his moles, the texture of his hair, whether he bit his nails, which is forgotten now. Keats once wrote he wished he knew what angle he wrote at his desk, but I know that he was a competent paddler. His desk still exists or doesn't. Two equally numbing possibilities. I could have helped them out. I could have gotten in. I could have asked them anything, but they looked so peaceful. They never took their eyes off me, but I did not feel threatened. I felt like I was being permitted something. allowed to put my hands on some cloaked, unparalleled thing, even though they just gazed up at me like lost fish, like they had no idea who I was, which is the strangest thing about him. Can you believe it? He never even knew me. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and I'm very excited for the rest of the event. Thanks again for having me and for listening.
Bravo, thank you, Dom. Wonderful.
Indeed, it was amazing.
Brilliant. I love your readings, thank you. But also, just what a thought. Just from the where we started, the 5-year-old girl and the frame on the painting in her.
Yeah.
So much to consider, and I particularly love your ideas, Dom, about how actually edges form definition. It's not restraint, but it's what gives us shape or what gives us meaning.
Exactly.
A quick question for you then, Dom. Just a quick fire back immediately. I love the line. I think it was, art is made under emotional volcanic pressure. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that and perhaps how that? Go on, explain this a little bit more.
So can you hear me again?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. I think that the urge to make any kind of art is one that comes from pressure that comes on the senses or the ear or your feelings, or what Frost called the lump in the throat, the thing that makes you want to do something. I think that formulaic writing gets dull, and I think in good art you can sense the pressure that's caused the eruption, and if you can't, then it tends to be quite boring.
Absolutely, could not agree more, Dom.
Yes, we'll be flaccid by comparison. Oh, brilliant, thanks, Dom. We'll come back to you later. Thank you for some more questions at the end, if that's okay. Christian Hugill would have loved to have been here with us this evening also, but has been snatched away by LBC. However, he is a presenter, radio and TV, and named as one of the 30 under 30 to watch, and was nominated for Best Presenter at what are the Radio Oscars. News, sport, F1, he does it all. And he was going to be here to talk to us particularly about his part in gay football fan groups and the friction perhaps that's there somehow between that sport and some of those fan groups. He can't be here, but he has generously made a little recording and sent it over for us earlier today. So let's have a look and see what he's got to say now.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian Hugill. I'm a freelance broadcaster and journalist. Nowadays I am a news and sport presenter, correspondent. I work for LBC, TalkSport, Times Radio. I do a bit of podcast production and make programmes for people. Before that I used to be on Newsbeat, doing the news and sport on BBC Radio 1. My specialism is football and Formula 1. And also, say it quietly, shock horror, I'm a sports broadcaster and I'm gay. It's fine, isn't it? But I've been asked to talk to you. Sorry, I can't talk to you live, but I've been asked to. I'm a bit busy with work at the moment, and I'm on an LBC shift, hence I can't be with you. But Stuart has asked me to talk in pre-recorded form a little bit about why I, and how my journey with LGBT sport has shaped me. One of the things I've done since going freelance in the summer, I made 2 documentaries for Virgin Radio. Virgin is home to Chris Evans and Graham Norton, but it does a spin-off station every summer called Virgin Radio Pride, a digital pop-up station, which you can listen to on Alexa and on DAB across the country. And I made 2 sports documentaries for them. If you could listen to one of them, if you were going to choose to listen to one, I would implore you to listen to one called The Rise of LGBT plus Football Fan Groups. It is available anywhere you get your podcast from. You just need to search Virgin Radio Pridecast, and it's called The Rise of LGBT plus Football Fan Groups. And it sort of explores my journey with being gay and being into sport a little bit. It's the first time I've been so personal in terms of presenting a programme in sort of my 10 years in the industry. And I dig into the fact that really, when I was young, I came out as gay at age 20 or 21. I probably first realised that I'm gay at age 14. And one of the things that kept me in the closet so much ultimately was the fact I was so into sport. I was heavily involved in motorsport at the time. I was a season ticket holder at Leicester City Football Club. You didn't have people like Claire Balding proving you can be out as a sports presenter on the telly. I just didn't know that she was there. She wasn't as much out at the time. You didn't have people like Gareth Thomas and Tom Daly as out gay athletes. People in the Lionesses squad who are out gay athletes. You didn't have programs like Drag Race on the telly where transgender people can talk about being themselves. None of this happened, and you know, my education didn't mention it, so it kept me in the closet, and a massive part of that was sport. And I think I still struggle with it a little bit. I still go into football press conferences and think, do I belong here? It still worries me a little bit, and what I try and do is be as open as I can as a broadcaster and as a journalist in saying, look, I'm gay, but I'm a sports journalist. The two aren't really interlinked. It's just me. It's just who I am. I think my relationship with being gay in sport feels really personal because it was something that kept me in the closet for so long, because I just felt that you couldn't both be gay and a sports broadcaster, or be gay and into sport. So I now try and go out my way to saying, look, people pay me to talk about sports on the TV and radio, and I'm gay. It doesn't matter. You can be gay, be LGBT plus, and be anything you want to be. And I'm really, really passionate about that. Is it changing? Yes, it is getting better. There is no doubt. Well, I'm 31. There's no doubt it's better than when I was 21. There's no doubt it's better than when I was being kept in the closet at 15, 16. There's still a long way to go. There is still homophobia in all walks of life. I don't believe it's necessarily any worse in sport than it is any other section of society. I just think sport highlights it. All people like me can do, and people like Jake Daniels, who's come out as gay in football, is just say, yeah, we are who we are, and carry on going about our business. I also think that, you know, there's things like, if you want proof of how much of an awful organisation FIFA is, they don't care about human rights. They'll give the World Cup to Qatar because it makes them money. That shouldn't be, you know, I am a football fan. I will watch the World Cup. It shouldn't stop me enjoying the World Cup. Maybe it would make me think twice about going there. I've been to Bahrain to cover Formula One, and that made me a little bit nervous. It is getting better, but we have a long way to go. And I believe what John Barnes says, that sport reflects society. And ultimately, there's still racism in society, there's still homophobia in society, and we're a long way there. And as I say, in terms of the World Cup, it's a huge shame that Qatar got offered it. It got offered it for financial reasons, without a thought for human rights, without a thought for LGBT people, in the same way that other sports go to Saudi Arabia without a thought of women's equality. That is where we are. Big organisations prioritise business in sport over human rights, and that is ultimately where we are. I think all that I can do, and all I try and do, is be open and talk about these things and say, yeah, I'm gay, but also I'm an Eastern sports broadcaster. People pay me to talk about sport, and it's fine. And hopefully, what I try and do is think, you know, I think if I'd seen the guy presenting sport on Radio 1 when I was a kid and knew he was gay, it would make me feel that I can do it. So hopefully there are people out there who see that I'm an ambassador for Fox's Pride, the LGBT fan group of Leicester City, and think, oh, he's a sports broadcaster and he's gay. It is possible. I don't have anything to worry about. That's my hope. That's all I can do. I hope that's helped. That's a few of my thoughts. I just try and be loud and proud, as it were, and carry on doing what I do. And I've had 10 years of people paying me to talk about stuff so far, so fingers crossed it carries on. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person to talk. I hope this has been helpful. I'm at Chris Hugill on Twitter if you want to talk to me or follow me on what I do. Lovely to talk to you.
Great. What a wonderful video from Chris, wasn't that?
That's great. Such a nice guy. And he said he'd given you his Twitter handle there, and he's very happy for you to send questions through. Do check out, if you can, Virgin Pride and his podcast on the rise of gay football fan groups. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, actually, we had a question come through from a fan who was just so excited that they just couldn't win. They sent one through to Chris saying, like, what was the, if I can remember it correctly, like, is there ever been a moment in your career where you felt you could not continue because of your sexuality or possibly any other reason? And even though Chris couldn't make it, he has been absolutely lovely, and he sent us through a voice memo. So hopefully, if I hold this up to the mic over here, this should work. Fingers crossed.
Of course, I'm not, but sometimes it can feel a bit of a lonely place. So I've sort of wondered, is it holding?
Actually, did you want me to go from the start?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
is it just?
Well, you said it.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, just go straight from the start.
Okay, never mind.
Let's
Okay,
try that again.
let's go again. Sorry.
Hey, Stuart. That's very nice that someone wanted to ask me a question. By all means, put my Twitter handle on, and you know, if anyone wants to tweet me or DM me any questions, only too happy to answer them. Did I ever feel that I didn't want to continue? No. I've definitely never felt that I wouldn't want to continue. I have felt a bit overwhelmed and daunted sometimes, thinking that I'm the only gay male in sport, and of course I'm not, but sometimes it can feel a bit of a lonely place. So I've sort of wondered, is it holding me back? Do I belong here in the world of sport, being a gay male? And that, those thoughts carry on. You know, I still have those moments. I think it's only understandable when you are sort of part of any minority to feel like, oh, Christ, is this for me? There are little moments that make me think it is, though. I mean, I just got nominated for Best Sports Producer at the UK Audio Awards, and little moments like that make you think, oh, okay, well, this is good. So you have little moments that perk your confidence back up again. But I've always had a determination. I mean, there's nothing else I'd want to do in my life other than be in broadcasting. So there's certainly always a determination to carry on and kind of get as far as I can, really. And I've also always felt very, you know, if I had seen a gay sports presenter when I was young, it would have helped me. So if I can help someone else, then great. And I've kind of always felt that sort of duty to kind of try as hard as I can, really. I hope that makes sense.
Very good. Point well made, Chris. It's so lovely that you wanted to answer that question. That point about him feeling like he was the only one, that seemed to stick with me. The whole feeling of just like feeling in isolation, feeling like you're an imposter amongst other people. It's something a lot of people have to deal with, unfortunately. And as I said, I think he's a great role model, and I think there are people for sure that he's inspiring out there as he pioneers his way through sport broadcasting. So that's brilliant. Absolutely. And with all that out of the way, we now come to our headline speaker, author of the Sunday Times bestseller, The Sixth Shakespeare, we've got right here, and more recently, Portable Magic. She entered the University of Oxford in 1988 and never quite left. She's taught numerous lectures, published dozens of essays, and a handful of books, of course. So that's a wonderful achievement. This mass of educational media they all take a range of angles from the bard himself, William Shakespeare. She's produced podcasts, many books, yet again, and talks just like this one that you're about to hear. She's even worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Professor Amber Smith reignites, revitalizes, and refreshes the bard's works for even the most reluctant readers. And tonight, there's a new queer twist to behold upon the stage. We're all players after all. So welcome, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much, Serafina. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I found the evening really inspiring so far. It's great to see Dom again, and funny that we're not both in Oxford. But I've loved hearing the stories. I'm going to slightly change angle a bit. What I'm going to be thinking about is what we can learn from the past, what we can learn from experiences in the past, what kinds of interpretations can we give to the literature of the past, and I'm going to take Shakespeare as an example. But I also wanted, I think I wanted my talk to be cheerful. So there's a lot to worry about being gay, feeling that you're not in some kind of mainstream, or you're not quite who you're supposed to be or who other people expect you to be. We heard at the start the problems in many countries in the world where homosexuality is illegal. We've just heard about homophobia and those things. Those are all really important. But there is something about queerness which is also about joy and fun and playfulness and laughing at ourselves. And enjoying some of the freedoms that we have to look at the world slightly differently. So that's going to be the line that I'm going to take, I think. And I'm going to start by sharing one of my favourite YouTube clips. So just bear with me.
Meet Juliet from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. She is about to take her own life. This fate could have been avoided if she had a sassy gay friend.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
I love him.
You love him? You met him Sunday. It's barely Thursday morning. Slow down, crazy. Slow down.
Love makes you crazy.
Yeah, I would say so. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Translation? Desperate, desperate. I am really desperate. Are there any stalkers on my grounds? Romeo killed your cousin Tybalt.
Tybalt killed his friend Mercurius.
David Pattyhurst, I'm not buying any Stockholm Syndrome today, thank you.
I'm a grown woman.
I think you're 14 and you're an idiot. You took a roofie from a priest. Look at your life. Look at your choices. Have you even slept with this guy?
I did.
You big slut. Good for you. Come on, you stupid bitch. She's a stupid bitch.
Let's stop on that. There are some slight issues about the language at the end there, I guess. But I enjoy it, and I enjoy it because it suggests that actually the tragedy in Romeo and Juliet is kind of the tragedy of being straight. And that's a nice twist, isn't it? We tend to think of the gay story being the tragic one, but there our sassy gay friend is saying, "Come on, girl, think a bit higher of yourself. Don't throw yourself away on this guy. I'm the person you need to kind of break out of this tragic spiral." So maybe that's a good start for us to think with. So let me share my PowerPoint and we can get going. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, I guess. Let's just see. We don't want that, do we? Don't want that, but we do want this. Is that okay? Yeah, play from start. Okay, so I've got three main things that I want to talk about over the next 20 or so minutes, and they're all about what can we do with Shakespeare, what can we do with the past, what kind of resource can it give us for living kind of creative and fulfilled and confident lives. What's the literature of the past got to show us? And I'm going to start by asking about Shakespeare's own life. So is there any evidence that Shakespeare might have been gay? I've highlighted this earring kind of for fun. It's not really clear that wearing a gold earring in one ear was any kind of signal that you might have been gay in the early 17th century. But I wanted to ask this question because sometimes that's where we start with thinking about where to look in the past, where to look for visions of sexuality, visions of self-fulfillment that perhaps step outside the norm. We tend to look back to artists' lives. And Shakespeare's not actually very helpful in that regard. We know that Shakespeare marries, he has 3 children. We don't know anything about his emotional life. We don't know anything about his friendships. We don't know anything about what he found important or what he chose to do. So his life really is a bit of a blank in emotional terms. It's not a very good resource for us to think about how we might identify forms of queerness in the past. What we've got to look at, though, is his works, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this series of poems by Shakespeare, published as his sonnets in 1609, so just into the 17th century. So firstly, let's say about the sonnets that they're quite an unusual thing for Shakespeare to write, in that we associate him with drama and with theatre, and I'm going to be talking in a few minutes about queerness and theatre, the kind of camp, performative possibility, the idea that we can be things other than what we are. We can try on different identities as being a really important component of theatre, and that's something I want to flag up. But I've started here with the sonnets because quite often they are set as the text which might speak to a biographically gay Shakespeare. Before I do that, though, I just want to tackle one thing, which is the way historians talk about the sexuality of the past. So historians will tell you that there were no such identities as gay or straight in the past. These are really relatively recent cultural inventions, which is a really interesting kind of mind-blowing thing, how these identities get named, and how you become, your identity becomes bound up with what you do. It feels as if in the 16th and 17th century, when Shakespeare is writing, sex or desire or passion or love or any of those words we might want to think about was something that you did, but not something that you were. If you can see the distinction there, it was a kind of activity, it was a kind of a verb, if you like, rather than a noun. It was a doing thing rather than a being thing, or rather than a kind of identity thing. So that's to say, you might have intense relationships with someone of the same sex, but you wouldn't necessarily give yourself a label because of that. You might think that the behavior or the desire had a kind of label, or even a kind of moral label, but you wouldn't necessarily call yourself a something, a gay person, or a queer person, or any of the kind of identities that might be available to us now. You wouldn't necessarily call yourself that in the past. Sometimes that's made historians sort of trying to erase a queer history in the past, or to say that it's anachronistic for us to look for it. And I can see the logic of that, I can see the truth of that, but I also think it's wrong. And I think it's probably wrong in a way which maybe unintentionally comes from a kind of comes from a place of kind of homophobia, which wants to disrupt the kinds of narratives or the kind of genealogies, the kind of histories we might want to construct for communities that have felt themselves to be marginalized or to be minorities. That's to say, it's a kind of historical Puritanism, which suggests that we can't really connect with the people of the past because they did not experience the world in the way that we do. Now, kind of that's obvious, isn't it? I mean, they didn't clean their teeth, for one thing, which I always think must have made sex and sexual encounters very, very different, whoever they were with. But nevertheless, I think it is worth us thinking about, I think it's possible for us to think about connections that we might have with the past, and not to necessarily go fully along with this, a kind of purist historical idea, which says these kind of identities were not available to people in the past. They did not have the word or the concept of being gay, and therefore we can't look for those desires or those communities in the past. I think we can. And the sonnets are an interesting place for that. So the sonnet tradition, you probably already know about sonnets. There's quite a lot of quite boring stuff about sonnets, really. You know, they're 14 lines long, la la la. They're mostly about someone who, a male speaker who is in love with a woman who hasn't got any time for him. So sonnets are all about haughty women who are super beautiful, but super, you know, kind of aloof and sort of painfully unrequited male lovers. And the sonnet is one of those almost slightly cliched straight genres in the 1580s and 1590s, the last decades of Elizabeth's reign. If you were a clever man, you would probably have a go at doing a sonnet. Just as if you were a vaguely musical person in the 60s, you'd probably have a go at strumming a guitar. And if you were a kind of vaguely artistic person right now, you might have a go at, you know, taking photographs with filters or something. That's to say, it's a completely available, you don't need to be particularly skilled. You can all just go along with it. So that's what sonnets tend to be like. That's the sonnet tradition that Shakespeare inherits. And what Shakespeare does with this book of sonnets here is really to transform that. And he does that by addressing a large proportion of these poems to a male love object, or a male object, rather than a female. So it's a male speaker addressing another man. These are homoerotic sonnets, and I've given you one. I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail, but if you want to look at this somewhere in the future, this is Shakespeare's sonnet number 20. It's one of the really famous locations where the speaker of the sonnets, I don't think it's Shakespeare, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but the speaker of the sonnets addresses the loved young man, or the beloved young man, in ways which are full of desire and anger, and this is not a kind of vanilla relationship. This is a very kind of fraught, passionate, disturbed kind of emotional feeling. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hast thou, the master mistress of my passion. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change as is false woman's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature, as she wrought thee, fell a doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. So the poem kind of sets up a boy, a young man who is more beautiful than a woman, like a woman, but not a woman, has a lot of erotic kind of plays. Since she pricked thee out, I don't need to probably to labour that, but that's something about what's attractive about the young man. So this is a person, this is a writer who is occupying generic territory which has been really thoroughly heterosexual, and turning it around to use it to think about the impossibility of desiring someone of the same sex. Now, does that mean that Shakespeare was gay? I don't think it gives us any indication about that one way or the other. What's really important about writing is that I think writing can be gay, writing can be queer. It doesn't mean that the writer has to be, or that we have to sort of try and find that out. Writing can be a writing of allyship, just as there can be allies, human allies. So the sexuality, the sexual orientation, the sexual possibilities of the writing, I don't think tell us anything particularly about their writer, except that this is something that he can imagine, which other writers don't seem to have thought about. So he can imagine that if you were thinking about erotic desire and its frustrations, and it's the impossibility of erotic happiness, one way you might figure that is in a same-sex dynamic. So Shakespeare can do that in the sonnets, but one of the things I think is really interesting is that sometimes he can do it in the plays, which we'll talk about in a minute, and sometimes he can't. There's a play that you may all know, because lots of students have to do it at school because it's full of fairies and things, which is Midsummer Night's Dream. Midsummer Night's Dream, I think, is a super raunchy play. I think it's a play about sex, really. It's completely unsuitable for children, but probably all the better for it, because it's about different kind of sexual possibilities. Do you want to sleep with an animal? Do you want to sleep, across species? Do you want to sleep in this kind of, do you want to have sex in this kind of sadomasochistic way? It's a very, very swinging kind of play. Let's say that. And it has, do you remember, it has this turns on this idea that the magic potion, magic flower on the lover's eyelids will make them fall in love with the first thing they see when they wake up. There are two men and two women whirling around the woods outside Athens. I think it doesn't take much imagination to think how you could shake those up into some different permutations, that you could have one of the men wake up and see the other man first and fall in love with them, or similarly with the women. But that doesn't seem possible for Shakespeare. He's really interested in those permutations, but this doesn't seem possible for him then. So that leaves me a bit uncertain about Shakespeare himself. There are some forms of work where he is quite able to entertain the idea that people might feel passionate erotic desire for someone of their own sex. And then there are other moments where that possibility seems either not to strike him or not to be one that he wants to pursue. Okay, so I've had a little think about Shakespeare's life. let's just step back from that for a moment. So I already mentioned a bit about a kind of historical, I suppose purism, that is what I'm talking about, which says people in the past did not think in these categories that we think in now, and therefore we can't find in the past examples of alternative sexualities that we might want to. And it is difficult. Clearly, it's really difficult. I mean, it's difficult to know. It's difficult to really know what your friends or members of your family think about all this, or what they feel about it. Let alone what do people who left relatively little trace of themselves 400 years ago. But I thought I would just talk about this one figure, historical figure, who I'm really fascinated by. And I partly did this to bring women and femininity into the debate about queerness in the past. Male homosexuality and male same-sex relationships, male passions are much more visible in the record than anything to do with women. So that's one thing for us to perhaps think about as we are trying to raid the past or turn to the past for models and ways of thinking for the present. Mary Frith is a real person. She lives in London, and she overlaps with Shakespeare for some of that time. So Shakespeare's 20 years older than her. He's born in 1564. But they're both in London, definitely, in the early years of the 17th century. And we know about Mary because she comes before the church authorities, the church court. In this period, the church manages all sort of moral failings. If you commit adultery, if you have a child without being married, all those kinds of things. The church deals with those. And she's brought before the church courts, Mary Frith, for a very particular set of behaviours which have been problematic. And they largely concern dressing in men's clothing. So it's not clear that Mary, in sort of modern parlance, it's not clear she wants to be a man. I'm not exactly sure whether it would be right to call her a trans character, a trans person, but she's certainly occupying a kind of non-binary territory. She's enjoying, who knows if pronouns, that kind of pronoun reassessment had been available then. Maybe Mary would be a kind of would prefer they them, but certainly she, let's stick with that for now, certainly she enjoys a life which is drawing on some of the associations and possibilities that are only available to men in her culture. So that's a picture of her there. She's smoking on a pipe, which is quite a male thing, and she's carrying a sword, which only men did, and she's wearing doublet and hose and tights rather than a dress. But what seems to have been really most challenging about Mary is that she didn't ever try, it seems, to pass herself off as a man or to trick people into thinking she was a man. She was a sort of phenomenon, a kind of queer phenomenon that, as we would see it now, who occupied a space between the genders, between the sexes, in a way which was deeply threatening to that society, because it was a society that was absolutely structured around the distinction between the sexes, and not only the distinction, but the hierarchy. So by usurping or taking on certain aspects of masculinity and strutting around, kind of showing off those things, Mary is a problem for the courts in London at the beginning of the 17th century. And there's a long court case. We've got all the information about it, what she's charged of, what she says back, and she clearly is not at all ashamed or cowed or worried about being brought before the court. And in fact, she completely takes over, really, and makes these very funny and witty remarks about herself and about what she's doing, which completely confound the judges, the bishops who are judging it, and they just don't know what to do. And in fact, they end up adjourning the hearing, and we don't know what happened in the end. We don't know what happened in terms of the court case, but we do know that Mary Frith's celebrity in London led to all kinds of publications and speculations about her, including a play for the theatre called The Roaring Girl. And Mary Frith is the roaring girl of the title. And this picture that we've got is her, is the character of Mary Frith called Moll Frith in the play The Roaring Girl. This is from the title page of that play, and I think she's probably standing. Those boards are probably intended to be the boards of the stage. What seems brilliant to me about this moment, this cultural moment, is that Mary Frith is famous in contemporary London for wearing the clothes which are appropriate and regulated for the opposite sex. So she's a woman wearing male clothing. It's a completely fantastic, euphoric, genderqueer moment to make a play out of that phenomenon, because, as you probably know, all female characters on the stage in this period are played by male actors. So the stage is already a place where the clothing and biological sex, we would now are already split. And in order to perform Mary Frith in the theatre, we have to have a male actor who is performing being a woman, who is herself best known for dressing in male clothing. It's a really dizzying kind of sequence, and it makes it really impossible to argue that that's a play that is doing other than enjoying all those layers and those possibilities. It's cheeky, it's engaged, it's wry, it's funny, it's poking fun, not explicitly but implicitly, at the church court's attempt to legislate for what bodies wear what clothes, and it uses the theatre, which is which champions that kind of permissiveness to do that. So maybe we could use Mary Frith, the real figure in London, and her avatar in the theatre, Moll, the Roaring Girl, to come back finally to a Shakespeare example. I wanted to think about Twelfth Night. So Twelfth Night is a Shakespearean comedy, and it's a comedy, the kind of comedy that we used to call cross-dressing comedy. And I've just set out some of the scenario here in case you don't know how the plot works. So Viola is a woman who's dressed as a man called Cesario. Orsino sends Cesario to woo Olivia on his, Orsino's, behalf. Cesario falls in love with Orsino. Olivia falls in love with Cesario. Elsewhere, Antonio loves Sebastian, who is a twin to Viola. Olivia marries Sebastian, and Orsino marries Cesario, or maybe he marries Viola. It's a little bit unclear. Now that's a whole network of relationships and desires. You could draw a kind of you could draw the kind of connecting web between these characters, and the majority of these desires express themselves as in some way same-sex. So Cesario is maybe really a woman, Viola, and Olivia, another woman, falls for that figure or that indeterminate figure. Cesario is really a man, dressed as a man, and Orsino is drawn to, becomes very close to that figure who presents as male. And then we've got Antonio, whose only point in the play, I think, seems to be in love with Sebastian, to be in love with another man. But Sebastian's job in the play is to be the male version of Viola, is to be Cesario, really. Now, if that sounds a bit confusing, I've wanted to make it confusing, really, because I've wanted to make it clear that this is a play that you have to have extraordinary sexual blinkers on if you think it is a straight play. If you think this is a straight romantic comedy, particularly if you think about it being designed for a theatre in which all the actors are male, it's a really difficult play to straighten out. And it feels to me that the point of this play is to think about a more multiple, a more permissive, a more enabling, a more fun set of desires. Twelfth Night takes place in somewhere called Illyria, and Illyria partly seems like a place of make-believe. Now, that doesn't mean that Shakespeare's society was as open or as permissive, just like our own society. You know, some of the cultural representations we see, you know, we heard just mentioned RuPaul's Drag Race or something, that might suggest, the popularity of that might suggest, you know, a massive acceptance of drag or trans identities, which we know is not actually true. So things can happen on TV and be enjoyable on TV and not happen in the same way on the street or on a bus or something. And I think that's pretty much the same in Shakespeare's time. People could enjoy things in the theatre, find things in the theatre funny, erotic, adventurous, exciting, which they would not be able to accept in regular life. That's what art does for us. It's a different place, isn't it? It's a different place from the world. But nevertheless, I think what this play offers is a kind of queer Shakespeare, a Shakespeare that is interested in, more interested in desire between people than between particular sexes or genders, and is enjoying the possibilities of all the different kind of rainbow ways, as we heard from Serafina at the beginning, all the different kind of rainbow ways that people can fall for each other, and on what basis. It seems to me no coincidence that the subtitle of Twelfth Night is this phrase, what you will, what you will. And people have sort of wondered, well, what does that exactly mean? And I think it means sort of whatever you want, whatever, go for it. Enjoy yourselves. Whatever you want to do, you do it. And that kind of permission, that's not the only thing the play is saying, and there's definitely a kind of darker side to those permissions. But when we're thinking about gay histories and about gay lives in the present, we perhaps, for very good reasons, tend to emphasize the difficulties. And it's good for us to have maybe a moment of queer joy or something. And I think one of my moments of that would be Twelfth Night. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Absolutely phenomenal. We love that, Emma.
Wonderful. I wonder, we're going to go to, I think we've got some questions coming in. I can see on the forum. I know we have some others there, so that we'll have for you, and Emma also will be able to hopefully ask you, Dom, also. Emma, just a quick one, going straight back to you about the idea perhaps of Shakespeare exploring homosexuality in poems where perhaps he wasn't in the same way in the theatre. Is that anything to do with the fact that one is maybe written for the royal court, whereas the other one is perhaps not, or?
Well, that's really, I think you're right that the question of reception is really important. I mean, Shakespeare isn't writing anything really for the court, I don't think, but he is writing for either a public theatre audience, a kind of performance moment, or for a sort of quieter, more isolated readership, I guess, for the poems. And I guess that does make a difference. The things that we are willing to accept or willing to engage with collectively as audiences perhaps are different from the kinds of things that we are willing to explore on our own, with our own reading or our own kind of research. So I do think the question of audience is a really interesting one. Yeah, thanks, Stuart.
Great. I'm going to bring, I think we have Becca out there somewhere in the ether, who I think may have some questions coming through.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much for your talk this evening. So, question for Dom that's come in. What would you say in response to theatre and plays with continuity of time? Are they essentially one long take? And therefore, where does their definition and shape come from?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we can hear you, Dom. Now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, cool. Sorry, the lack of my ability of my computer to get off mute gives me time to think, so that's very nice. I am very inexperienced as a viewer of theatre, so I probably won't give a very good response to this. What I'd say is that I think, similarly to the thing I'm saying about films having takes, is not dissimilar to the idea of a play having scenes, and the idea that the separation of time in a work of art is what makes that work of art distinguishable as a work of art. So the way that a line makes a movement of time between two segments of time, whether it's defined time by scansion or just purely by the visuals on the screen, on the page, that's a better way of putting it, on the screen, or on the screen for a film between scenes. I think scenes in a play act much in the same way, that you are consciously and artfully dividing up time, and through that division comes the shape of the art form. I think. I'm not sure if that's very clear, but I think plays act in a similar way to films, in that you are an audience viewing. The only difference that it makes is that you are physically in the room. So if anything goes wrong, you see it happen. So I'm not sure if that's a great response.
Great, thank you, Joshua. Throwing you in at the deep end there with a medium perhaps you're not most familiar with, but thank you. Becky, do we have more questions?
We do. So we've just had one that's come in twice, actually, for Emma, the same question. So Emma, what is your view on Antonio and my Shakespeare knowledge is terrible, this is embarrassing, Bassanio's relationship in The Merchant of Venice? So two people are keen to know what you think about their relationship.
So yeah, that's a great question. Thanks both times for having it. So I think one thing I would say is what lots of I was thinking about Dom's poem and the image of friends, you know, around the fountain, the friends. And one of the things I think about that series, Friends, is it's a heterosexual kind of, it's a hymn to heterosexuality, isn't it? But what it also gives us is a hugely emotionally significant set of male friendships. And the very end of the series, Friends, is the guys moving out of their apartment and they're breaking up the table football and all of that. And it's a kind of, it's a very Shakespearean moment, because what Shakespeare always shows us in romantic comedies is that there are huge sacrifices, particularly for men, in their friendships with other men if they're going to be married. And I think Merchant of Venice is one example of that. And it's a very pronounced example of it because Antonio does not want to let Bassanio go, and that's very clear. The very end of the play, he is still in a kind of rivalry with Portia, who Bassanio has married, over Bassanio. They're kind of standing on the stage, kind of trying to claim him. And I think that it's the times when I've seen that relationship made most recognizable in the theatre, it has been an explicitly gay relationship. That may be the way that we need to see it in order to understand its intensity. And it may be that there was an intensity to male friendship which was not explicitly sexual in the past. But yeah, it's a very strong relationship. Do I know if they're sleeping together? I do not know that. But I think if you're a director putting that play on, you could certainly suggest it.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Emma. I was always considered whether they're sleeping together. I always maybe saw it as Antonio having some sort of unrequited homoerotic love for Bassanio, so perhaps that's never a relationship that's been fulfilled, and perhaps that's maybe what makes him so sad.
I can see that. I can see that. I mean, Bassanio is, for someone who's not requiting that love, he is enjoying having a sugar daddy, isn't he? That's a sexualized role, and I think there's a way, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying this. Something similar happens with Twelfth Night, where I mentioned another Antonio. You know, there's something about that character name, who's in love with Sebastian. Lots and lots of critics want to say, well, Sebastian, you know, doesn't return that, and that allows Sebastian to be straight and get married, or it allows Bassanio to be straight and get married. I'm not sure that the endings of those plays are quite as one directional as that. I think that there is something quite what we might call pragmatic or self-serving about these men pursuing these marriages, and they may well be continuing to get their emotional satisfaction and perhaps even their sexual satisfaction from these male figures. So I'm not so happy with that reading that says Antonio might be gay, but Bassanio's not. I think Bassanio knows exactly what he's doing, and that's how he gets Antonio to borrow 3,000 ducats on his behalf, which is probably about £500,000. It's a hell of a lot of money. This is not just a few, you know, this is not just a little bit of money for some new clothes. This is a lot of money.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Becca, who's up next? What other questions do we have?
So another one in for Dom. What do you personally think about prose poems? Are they missing something without the line breaks? Or which subjects do you think that they perhaps best suit because of their nature?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, I love prose poetry, and I've written on prose poetry for many years, and think it's a, you know, that what I was trying to kind of communicate was that I think that prose poetry is absolutely poetic, but I think what makes it poetic is its lack of lines. And I think what makes it interesting and what makes you read it in a certain way is the fact that there is no line break. There are lots of prose poets who use prose poetry in very, very different ways, and I think it would be impossible to say that there was one way to use the prose poem or one way to affect a reader with prose poetry, because the way that Claudia Rankine is using it is very different from the way that a poet like Banu Kapil or a poet like Simon Armitage is using the prose poem. I think what I say about the prose poem being quite dreamlike, I think, has held up whenever I've read one. My prose poetry reading is limited, but in my experience, that's what I felt, that it feels somehow more dreamlike than a poem, in the way that watching a 3D film feels more dreamlike than watching a 2D film. Even though we live our lives in 3D, in real life, we're not used to seeing it on a screen, and therefore it's weird. Same way with poetry, we're used to reading it in lines, and when we're not reading it in lines, that's quite strange. And I think it's that quality that poets are utilising when they write prose poems, for whatever reason that may be.
That's great. I really like that, particularly I like that analogy with the 3D movie. Like you say, maybe there's something there about subverting our expectations of kind of knowing what it is, but how it's dressed up, if you will. Becca, what's next?
Okay, so we've just had a question in from Tom, and this is a question for both Emma and Dom, because he said he knows that Dom is a great Shakespeare reader. So, is there something queer in the sense of anarchic about Shakespeare putting weird jokes about his own name in quite a few of the sonnets? Does that in turn suggest anything about Shakespeare's sexuality?
I wish you would take this one, Emma.
Okay, so that's a great idea, and in fact we could see it also. I just said that the subtitle of Twelfth Night is "What You Will," and that word "will" is a very compressed pun for Shakespeare, particularly in the sonnets, where it means desire, sexual desire, agency, also his name. So I think that is that is a really interesting aspect of Shakespeare's work. I think it's, in some ways, it's got the kind of quality of a rebus or a code that people read into, and that's something that's quite common in the sonnet tradition, that you're encouraged to look for the sort of true names, the true people who are the lovers in the sonnet. That's a kind of game or a riddling game that's quite common in that genre. I think Shakespeare's using it. I'm really interested in the question, and I'd love to think more about this. I wonder if we sometimes lose a sense of what queer might mean if it means anything that's not ordinary, and maybe maybe we might want to sort of I don't know whether that amplifies in a really helpful way and resonates, that word and that concept, across aesthetics and politics and norms of all kinds. That might be a really great thing to do. I wonder if it's in danger of losing the specificity of some of the more politicized struggles that we began by talking about. And I don't know what I think about that. I like the umbrella-ness of queer, but I don't necessarily want it to be a synonym for not normal, whatever normal might mean in whatever context.
Fair enough. I mean, that's the whole thing about the term queer generally. I think people online in particular have been reclaiming the word queer and just embracing it as just a term for, anything that's not straight or anything that's not cisgender, for example. Like, there's the whole term genderqueer, for example. That's basically anything not cis in a sense. So yeah, I like your answer, Emma. Thank you for saying that. Are there any other questions coming through?
Yes, we've got here from one of our sixth formers. Thinking about everything we've said about Shakespeare and what he writes about, whether it's in his sonnets or in his characters in his plays, are our 21st century readings legitimate, or are we actually just twisting the work to suit our worldview and our understanding of humans and society today?
Yeah, so the reason that we're reading Shakespeare and we're not really reading Webster or Middleton or Johnson or all of the other playwrights of the period is the availability of Shakespeare's works for exactly that twisting. So that's what the value of Shakespeare is to us, that we can change it, that we can occupy it, we can make it mean what we, to some extent, what we want it to mean. And that's what I've written about, and I've called that gappiness. That's a quality, a particular quality of Shakespeare's writing, which makes space for us. So I think that not only are our 21st century readings legitimate, but I think they're the only ones that we can honestly do, because they're the only ones that we have access to. So yeah, more of that, absolutely. Shakespeare's not a museum. There's no point reading a museum piece.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I think if I may have one final question, if I may, and that is something not about Shakespeare at all, but is about this gem here, Portable Magic. And I wonder if you might just tell our viewers a little bit more about your new book and where that's come from and what that's all about, your inspiration there.
Yeah, thanks. So now I feel as if I'm in a kind of sales mode, which is very, very nice. Yes, available at all good bookshops. Yeah, thanks for the chance to talk about that. So I wanted to write a book about why books, why the actual object of the book matters to us so much. And I thought about that in a number of ways. Why do people respond so extremely if a book is damaged or a book is thrown away or a book is burnt? Why are those such red button issues for us? But also, why has the book, why and how has the book been such a kind of constant for us over pretty much 2000 years? and why are we so weird about books? Actually, I think that was probably the bottom line of why they're such particular kinds of objects. And I kind of argue the first books were Bibles, were kind of sacred books. The word biblios, where we get Bible, means book, so there's an overlap there. And I kind of suggest that we've kept a sort of sacredness in books, even as their contents have changed to be non-sacred. But I've got a nice bit of queer history in it, which is the escapade in which Joe Orton, brilliant gay playwright in the early 1960s, and his lover Kenneth Halliwell borrow a load of boring middlebrow books from Islington Library and do this amazing camp kitsch sort of decoupage, queering up all the covers. So they're called Kenneth Halliwell and Joe Orton, and you can Google these covers. They're fantastic, and I write about why that was both so radical and why it got such a distinct backlash. So there is definitely a queer element to some of those book stories.
Wonderful, thanks very much. And I have to say, guys, those of you at home, it's that kind of book where you kind of pick it up and you think, I'll just have a look at a page or two, and then you find yourself there on your third copy 4 hours later and still relishing every word. So do go grab it.
Good for Christmas presents for anybody. Anybody will like it as a Christmas present. That's my last word on this. Thank you.
Absolutely. In fact, if we're going to go into total book mode, you can pick up Portable Magic. You can pick up This Is Shakespeare. I had to leaf through it. It's amazing. You can pick up Donald. I'm so sorry. You can pick up Dom's pamphlets. Love. I've forgotten the name.
Love, Bring Myself and Dirt is the new one.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. And of course, Shivani's book. I'm so sorry that you couldn't be here. Everyone knows that I'm a haunting. It's beautiful. It's amazing. Love it. Love it. Love it. Available online, bookshops. You guys know where to get books. You're all smart enough. So that does bring us to the end of our Pop Talks, our fascinating discussion of literature, poetry, film, sport, and our considerations of the world in which we live and love. Thank you all to our wonderful speakers, Dominic Leonard, and do check out Broken Sleep books again, the pamphlets, the leaflets even. I'm so sorry, I can't speak today. And in fact, if you're on the lookout for divers, inclusive terrific readings, check out Gaze the Word, a genuine icon of literature, just off Russell Square, or obviously online. Also, thank you to Professor Emma Smith, thank you to Chris Hugo, who also couldn't be here, but had the lovely video and the voice message. And thank you for joining us as we celebrate and support the shining, beautiful brilliance of the LGBTQ+ community in literature and far, far beyond. And we hope that in some teeny tiny way, this has given you food for thought, illuminated new ideas of tolerance, or empowered you to speak out for yourself or as an ally for a friend, then we will be delighted. I've absolutely adored the talk that we've had tonight. I've been looking forward to this for ages and ages. You've been looking forward to it, Mr. Bird. It's been great. It just made me think tonight, when we get together to gather ourselves, our thoughts and perspectives, it's the power of it's the power of a community like our school that ignites these conversations, that allows us to have these conversations. There are these moments where we know it's possible to make more spaces like this, especially going back to the Pride Society at the start. There are these moments where we know we can spark change and togetherness. Isn't it fantastic to be able to just connect the entire school like this, to support and raise awareness for a community that's just always been here? There's a reason the phrase "love is love" is practically the motto, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah, of course the course of true love never did run smooth, but we need not allow others to stand obstacles in our way.
Absolutely right. Love is love, after all, and surely in love, at least, there has to be, surely there must be equality for all of us. Thank you for joining us tonight. Once again, thanks to our speakers. Thank you, as we've been here to say it with pride. And love is love. And if this be error and upon me proved, I never writ nor no man ever loved. Thank you very much. And good night.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
See you guys.